While Chris is getting ready to his, I'll introduce Chris. I'm not going to say your last name, Chris, because I'll ruin it. But Chris is from the Western Downs Regional Council, talking to us today about using automated image analysis and real-time monitoring to engage land managers in coordinated landscape-scale feral pig programs. Again, thanks to Narelle and Heather for putting these presentations in order so we can show a bit of a systematic approach to some of the problems we have been faced with. So thanks, Chris. Chris is an NRM officer for the Western Downs Regional Council. He's developed and established the council's vertebrate pest monitoring program, which has been running since 2014. Over to you, Chris, and thanks again for your time today.
Thanks, Ricky, and you wouldn't be the first person to mispronounce my last name. So I'm Chris Gaschk, and obviously we're from the Western Downs here in, I guess, southwest Queensland. And today I just want to have a bit of a chat to you is all about utilising data to try and engage land managers to meet their general biosecurity obligation, and that's just not related to pigs for us. It's a range of species, but obviously pigs is a big part of the picture. So yeah, in my presentation today, I'll cover why we need to monitor. Andy's probably sort of covered a little bit of that. The considerations we made as an organisation to establishing a long-term regional monitoring program, and how we use that information to better engage landowners. Some of the outcomes from that and some of the future developments around our program. First of all, however, I'd like to acknowledge the fact that, you know, this program was very much a team effort from our whole NRM team, contributing to the success of the program and how it actually delivers on ground. So why monitor? Well, if the definition of insanity is doing something repeatedly and expecting a different result, then what defines doing something repeatedly and yet never knowing the result? Too often in pest management, the measure of the success of a control campaign comes from a kill sheet, or, you know, the amount of effort we put in. This, I feel, is often measuring the wrong end of the stick. This data is usually easily accessible, but it can also be highly biased and kind of misleads the evaluation process. It was this lack of understanding and inability to effectively evaluate our programs that led WDRC to develop a long-term regional pest management program, monitoring program, I should say. Council's operational expenditure for pest management was in the hundreds of thousands of ratepayer dollars, yet prior to 2014, none of that budget was actually allocated to evaluate whether the investment was achieving outcomes. Evaluating the program was based on landowner opinion solely, and depending if they thought you had a carrot or a stick, it would result in two very different answers. So as a government entity managing public money, our team felt uneasy in this approach. We had no means of actually evaluating if that money was well spent or if they're achieving any meaningful outcomes. We as public servants have an obligation to our community and to the environment to tell sometimes inconvenient truths rather than just stick our head in the sand and use data sets that, you know, tell stories that we actually like. So as a council, we began the pilot project in 2014. It covered 2 properties, surveying roughly around 10,000 hectares with 10 black flash cameras. With that, the data collection from that program was totally manual. So we'd go out to the paddock, collect SD cards, go to the manual entry. We quickly realised when we started the pilot project that having localised data to support, you know, council and community-led programs was actually really valuable. Having this information allowed decision makers to effectively evaluate programs, and that's a step that's long been missing in this space. Without it, it reduced the ability to improve or change our delivery of our programs, and there was no way to actually really gauge success or failure. So once we sort of completed the pilot project and we thought there was value in it, we decided to expand the program. Council was fortunate enough to secure external funding streams to implement a 22K grid of cameras across the region. with a focus on trying to identify long-term activity indices, sort of as Andy mentioned there. And this successful bid for the funding only came from our ability to show that we could actually generate data-based evaluations and reporting through the pilot project. When we then commenced the rollout of our 93 cameras across the region, you know, it covered 3.8 million hectares. And so that's at a fairly low density. But still, to actually achieve that, it wouldn't have been possible if we hadn't adopted new technologies such as file transfer protocol, which sends the raw data from the field to a centrally hosted web page. And that alone slashed major inputs in the project as far as labour is concerned, as we weren't actually having to physically go out to collect data from cameras, and they worked in the field indefinitely with solar units. So at this stage, we have about 85 cameras operational on our regional grid, which roughly represents about 3 million hectares. We have the remaining 8 still yet to deploy, hopefully early in 2022. But we've had delays in finalising these last cameras sites because they're cellular black spots. So we require a slightly different tech solution to overcome the lack of coverage in those areas. So our hope, each camera sends an average of about 500 images a week. And manual data entry for such a project like that would have been a mammoth task and really unjustifiable. Technology adoption has again been the saviour, and since Google released its open source machine vision software, the world is innovating the way we manage image data sets. Neural network software, more broadly known as AI, has the capabilities to change data entry from completely manual to fully automated. The days of sifting through hundreds of false triggers for a single picture of a pig are behind us, I believe. And with artificial intelligence now being capable of doing the heavy lifting. Speed of capture to classification allows the capability for an alert system now, which can send land managers a notification via mobile app or email when a species of their interest is captured on their camera. This leading to increased engagement of the land stewards, keeping their GBO hopefully in the forefront of their mind. The app that would allow us this function is currently waiting on approval from Apple and Google, so we're hoping to release that early in 2022 as well. Our hope is that this app will allow landholders to undertake management actions prior to further impacts. However, the real potential of monitoring in near live forum is that we can use long-term trends to hopefully predict future pest activities into the future. This information will be crucial in shifting decision-making from predominantly a reactive approach to a proactive approach, which would hopefully prevent further impacts. And so just on this slide here, we actually have the Western Downs region and how we actually represent our data, which is our pest activity indices. And from here, you might be able to see that there's outlines of groups, and the shaded groups are our actually most active groups when it comes to feral pig activity. So they predominantly do aerial shooting, with some doing baiting and trapping as well. And you kind of can see that there's a bit of a trend with that. Pretty much the real hotspot areas that we see high pig activity are outside of fairly active groups. So we sort of take that as an assumption that the level of control that those groups are doing is having some sort of effect. But as far as density, we don't fully know. We also can use those activity indices to identify what's our major months of seeing pig activity. And what we see, and it's probably to do with how we sample, our sampling sites is based around water points. So with pigs especially, obviously their dependency on water through the summer months increases. So we generally do see a higher activity through those periods. On this slide here is just another example of how some of the reports we give to our landowner groups on helping them evaluate their programs. So those two graphs are two different pest management groups we've got. We've broken down those the pig activity to monthly indices, and then we've compared 2 years essentially and seen if there's a percentage of change. Again, that doesn't always equate exactly to pig numbers as such, but at least it gives the landowners an idea of what's happening with activity trends. And so I'll just play this video here for you. This is the AI software that we use. It's called Avorta. It's by a tech company here in Australia that's developed it. And it essentially has revolutionized the way that we've been able to do monitoring and evaluation, because it's automated a large percentage of the process. There is still some manual data cleansing that we do, but the time consumption that it takes is minimal compared to the capacity. So this may not mean a lot to everyone here, but at least it gives you an idea of how that software functions for us. So here we have like going through the thumbnails. This is a really good engagement tool for landowners that have access to this. And they can scroll through, I guess, and just get an idea of what's happening with pigs on their place. It's nothing like actual photos for landowners to actually engage them. For us, it's more about bar graphs and, you know, what's happening with trends and that sort of thing. But as far as landowners on ground, I think they really prefer that visual format of being able to engage on what's happening with feral pigs in the area. Here too, we actually have, and this is a bit of the manual function, we actually have the ability to do individual ID. So we can tag individual pigs and give them a name or a number or whatever. And that's where we hope to go with this data, is to actually sort of start shifting into, you know, I guess, mark capture, recapture sort of studies. But we're sort of talking with the likes of Andy and, you know, even our state counterparts here in Biosecurity Queensland about how best to go about that, just so that we don't have any, I guess, major biases in our data set, or that we're just actually interpreting the data wrong. So, and up in the top left there, you can filter pretty much on any of those values there. So you can look at specific cameras, time ranges, confidence levels that the AI has, and species. So we're not just searching for pest species here. We can actually look at the effect as far as native species goes, which is a really good way of actually evaluating the effect of our control programs. Oh. So here we are. And so a project of this scale isn't without costs. The expenditure and monitoring hasn't been without criticism, with some stakeholders preferring dollars spent on ground. Though our strongly held belief is that you cannot have one without the other to effectively manage the impacts of pest animals. So the cost of not monitoring is really the great unknown. Internally, we see the 1% expenditure of our monitoring program as the justification for the majority of the 99% of the remaining budget. This program has the added benefit of being able to effectively report on outcomes of externally funded projects from either the state or federal governments. And it makes us a trusted organisation for them to deliver their funding through. Collecting this information is great, but if we don't utilise the information to improve outcomes, it's another pointless government program. Throughout the project, we've have improved the way we interpret, utilise and report on the data. We've had a real focus on aiming to engage landowners and community-led groups to use this information to better their practices on ground. We've improved our focus on engagement through a number of ways. Firstly, we've provided individual logins for our data set to both our pest group coordinators, so they're the people in charge of a specific area in our region to engage all the landowners in that region to run control programs, and then also individual landowners that host cameras on their place. This is a particular benefit to pest group coordinators in making better decisions or to evaluate the effectiveness of, like, say, an aerial shoot or something like that. Access to Envorder allows the coordinators to identify general trends of pig activity in their region, identify percentages of change in feral pig activity after a control event, and also debunk many of the myths that come from potential naysayers by having actual localized data. Having site-specific information is essential, as too often in case studies or research is fobbed off with, oh, that wouldn't work here, purely because the research wasn't done in their area or state. Having actual pest data from their own region eliminates that excuse, and nothing also engages a landowner to do more control than seeing a big mob of pigs in a photo. You know, it's just that basic psychology. However, there's always a balance in the use of this information in relation to both privacy and sampling bias. So to do so, we actually rectify the camera's site back to the central coordinate of its grid. And therefore it sort of protects the landowner privacy and also protects it from being cherry picked as a site with control, because we want to sort of be having a non-biased monitoring of that, of the, you know, coordinated group's effort. So we don't really reveal that information to the pest group coordinator. So it's really only council and the landowner that knows the location of the camera site. So where to from here? Within ecological monitoring in general, the adoption of this sort of technology can lead to a significant improvement in our ability to inform decisions. Technology improvements in batteries, data transfer and classification will become cheaper and reduce some of the barriers to collecting and collating raw ecological data. For council, we feel that this program's only at the tip of the iceberg. Improvements we're focused on in the near future include manually implementing mark capture recapture analysis in our data set to hopefully begin getting a better estimate of abundance, complementing the data interpretation by looking at some of our other data sources, such as the aerial shooting, kill sheets, and other data sources that we have. You know, seasonal conditions, site metadata and impact data from around the region, and correlating sort of between effort, response and impact. We're also looking at testing our current sampling design against some of those higher density sampling methods, such as that SECA model that Andy was talking about earlier. We're hoping to do that in the near future. We're also hopefully increasing the density of our grid to about 15 kilometre grids, which would be about 195 cameras across our region. And we're also investigating other research projects such as collaring pigs to complement some of that data capture. So we have, like, I guess, a spatial element to it. And then we're also always trying to reduce the costs and increasing our capacities, particularly with data transfer. That's a major cost in our program. And we're looking at technologies such as LoRa networks and Internet of Things sensors. So we're also identifying ways which we can better improve landowner and coordinator engagement, which may include sort of marketing, I guess. So just making, you know, graphs or anything a bit more engaging to the eye. We're looking at improved access in the form of, obviously, the mobile app that I mentioned earlier. If people are more old school, we're looking at ways that we can automatically generate monthly PDF reports that are emailed to them, and then also improving our analytics. So with the improved analytics and forecasting, hopefully, as a way to better achieve our aspirational goal, which is to provide land managers with a tool they can evaluate a return on investment and predict future pest trends. So ideally, we want to be shifting our land managers away from just implementing control after the horse is bolted to a more forward-thinking approach to biosecurity. So in conclusion, I'd strongly encourage any organisation involved in pest management to begin implementing some sort of monitoring program. Without that ability to effectively evaluate our effort, we don't know whether we're meeting the needs of today, let alone the challenges of the future. And if you are considering implementing a program, approach others who have done that already, because there's a lot of mistakes to learn and it's easy to learn from someone else's mistakes. So thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions later on.
Thanks very much, Chris. Again, a lot of information in there, and good to see some of those on-ground challenges and practicalities. Really good to hear your thoughts as well on that hard balance between investment and the cost of things, especially when you look at the two sides of more money towards on-ground things, or the investments put towards monitoring and evaluation. And as we come to find in this sector, the more we can better measure our impact, we're around for the long run. So trying to get that evaluation story right gives us more chances for future investment opportunities to do the types of things we're doing. So yeah, thanks again, Chris. There's been a few questions coming in the chat function. Again, we'll go through those in the question and answer session. But also, if you any of the participants have any other questions, please, reminder to use that chat function.